put a lot of research into this team in pre-season, and here's my final draft. Building from the back, I've gone for Pickford. It was between him, Flecken and Steele. If Steele was nailed, he'd be my favourite option, but he's not, so it's between Pickford and Flecken. I'll be honest, I've had Flecken in goal for most of pre-season, but I've had to give in and bring in Pickford. That's because he rotates better with Turner, even though Everton's defence isn't quite as good, and Brentford's defence is better. If you look at the fixture difficulty ratings and the clean sheet odds when you rotate them, Everton and Forest rotate better than Brentford and Forest. Whilst this video is being recorded, Turner looks like he's going to be the number one for Forest. Of course, if they sign another goalkeeper like Henderson, then he won't be. But if that's the case, Pickford's still nailed. And out of all the 4.5 mil goalkeepers, he's got the highest projected clean sheet points in the first 8 game weeks. A big thank you to Draftdown for providing the clean sheet odds. I wouldn't be able to get to this conclusion without their data. If you're not already a pro subscriber yourself, I strongly advise you click the link in the description. I can tell you from experience, I'm a pro subscriber. You get expected minutes, expected points, probability of returning, predicted lineups and player comparisons. It's all really useful to get a good head start in this FPL season. Before we move on to the defence, I've got a little idea for the goalkeeper position. If we get leaked team news that Ortega's starting for City, I would definitely bring him in. He's a £4 million goalkeeper and he plays for the best defence in the league. So even if he plays for one game, it's worth the risk. There is a decent chance that he could retain that first team spot because he had it in the Community Shield as well, and Edison wasn't that good last season. Moving on to the defence, I think Estupinan's good value for money for just 5 mil. I prefer him for the short term rather than the long term though. I don't think his fixtures are good after 3 game weeks. So what I'll probably do is either sell him after 3 game weeks if I've got a spare free transfer. If not, it'll probably be after 6 game weeks. At least what I can do is play Baldock in game week 4 against Everton at home, and then Bayer in game week 5 against Forest away. That way I'd be able to squeeze another easy fixture out of him against Bournemouth at home, but I'd probably shift him on after 6 game weeks because he's got difficult fixtures after that. I did consider a 4.5 mil rotation. That would be between Botman and Henry because they've got easy fixtures right up until game week 19, so whenever you're wildcarding that wouldn't be a problem, but I prefer the upside of a £5 million defender because there's more flexibility where I can jump on another £5 million defender that's got a higher upside. That's not something I can do with one free transfer when I've got 2 4.5 mil defenders. For example, if I can see Ake or Akanji's playing every single game, I can move straight to them in one free transfer. Next up in defence is Gabriel. I'm going to keep him for the foreseeable future. Arsenal have one of the best defences in the league, and I think he's good value for money as well at just 5 mil. He's also got attacking threat. To be fair, I think Saliba's slightly more nailed, but I think Gabriel's got the higher upside because of his expected goals. The last starting defender isn't a defender you'll see start often. It's Baldock against Palace at home. That's because Chilwell faces Liverpool at home, who you'll see in the first team much more often, especially up until game week 8 when Chelsea have got those easy fixtures. But for now, Sheffield United have got higher clean sheet odds than Chelsea this game week, and Baldock's still got attacking upside as well. I know Chilwell's got a bit more, but it's not enough to compensate. To be fair, Chilwell has easy fixtures after this game week. Like I mentioned earlier, that's right up until game week 8. So I've actually doubled up on 2 Chelsea players, and you'll see that later on in the video. But for now, Chilwell is actually my favourite Chelsea asset. I do prefer him to James because he's a slight less injury risk, and I do think Chelsea are worth targeting because of the fixtures. I'll be honest, I love Chelsea's fixtures that much that I wouldn't be surprised if I'm tripled up on them ahead of game week 3. If we were allowed 4 players from the same team, I would actually go for Colwell at the minute as well. He's the best 4.5 mil defender to start with in my opinion. So if you've not already got 2 Chelsea players and you want a 4.5 mil defender, I'd bring him in. Of course, I don't want to block that third Chelsea slot myself. Colwell's got a high floor, but he's not got a high ceiling. And I might want to jump on a player that's from Chelsea that has a high ceiling, who might be performing well, like Sterling or Mudryk. I would prefer to make the most out of those fixtures. My last defender is Bayer, and he's definitely not playing this game week because he faces City. Out of all the £4 million defenders, for me, there's 3 of the best options. You could go for Baldock, Bayer, or Kabore from Luton. Now, I've purposely gone for Baldock first. That's because he doesn't blank in game week 2, but Luton and Burnley do blank. So if you're going to get 2 £4 million defenders, I wouldn't get them both from Luton and Burnley, which means I wouldn't go for Kabore and Bayer. I'd pair one with Baldock just so you've got cover for that game week. Moving on to midfield, Salah opens with a difficult fixture, but I've got him there because I want him for captaincy in game week 2 against Bournemouth at home. Out of all the remaining Premier League teams, Bournemouth conceded the most amount of goals last season, and Haaland's game week 2 opponents Newcastle conceded the least in the whole league. If you've not already noticed, I am a fixture man, so if you consider captaincy, I'd rather have 2 Salahs against Bournemouth at Anfield and 1 Haaland against Newcastle at the Etihad, rather than 2 Haalands and no Salahs whatsoever with those fixtures. Of course, if you do go for Salah, you have to commit to captaining him in game week 2, otherwise the points per million isn't worth it. If you prefer Haaland in that game week and the first game week, personally, I just go without Salah and spread the funds. If you're not considering Salah, there's one question I want you to ask yourself, and I want you to be honest as well. If Salah was facing Bournemouth at Anfield in game week 1, would you bring him in? If your answer is yes, then I'd reconsider what you think, because of course, Salah's still going to play in game week 2, he's absolutely nailed, and you're telling me that you were only going to own him for 1 game week, then you were going to use 1 or 2 transfers to sell him after just 1 game week. That would be a waste of free transfers, and it would probably lead to hits. Next up are the 2 8.5 mil midfielders, Bruno Fernandes and Saka. I think both of these have been underpriced, they've got really high expected minutes, and they're both on penalty duties. The pair of them will probably benefit from the new Premier League rule, where referees are encouraged to add on the right amount of time at the end of matches, which means we're likely to see a lot of added time like we've seen in the World Cup, and players like this who are likely to make it to the 90-minute mark will strongly benefit from it, especially with them being attacking. I have got FOMO over Rashford, but he was one of the sacrifices that I had to make to bring in Salah. To be fair, I think Bruno Fernandes and Saka will get similar points per million anyway. There is a chance that Salah might get shifted onto Rashford ahead of game week 3, then I can spread the funds. That's one transfer option, but I don't like booking in transfers. I like to be flexible and adaptable. If you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can see what I'm going to do in future. In fact, if you've made it to this point in the video, you clearly find it informative, so you might as well subscribe anyway. For the first of my 6.5 mil midfielders, I've gone for Mitoma as a short-term punt. And like I mentioned with Estupinian, I don't like Brighton's fixtures after 3 game weeks, but I could last until 6 game weeks. Of course, if he is providing good value for money, I'll probably just keep him anyway, because 6.5 mil's cheap, and he has got a pretty high ceiling. Either way, I think there's plenty of value for money in that Brighton team in the first few fixtures. My last player in midfield is my other 6.5 mil midfielder, it's Mbeumo. He's currently flagged in the game as a 75% chance of playing, but I will wait until the press conference until I make a decision on him. If he's deemed fit to play, he's my favourite player at that price point for the long term. I say that because of the absence of Tony. It means he'll take on penalty duties, and he should take on more of a central attacking role as well. Something that backs that up is that he had promising underlying stats in Tony's absence at the end of last season. Up front, of course I've got Haaland, and he's going to be my captain against Burnley away. I wouldn't blame anyone for going for Saka against Forest at home, but for me, I'm not going to overthink it. I prefer Haaland against the promoted side. I get you could put a narrative either way on it, but for me, he's my favourite captain this game week. My 4.5 mil forward is Asula. That's because Sheffield United have lost Ndiaye, which means he could get the forward slot, and his expected minutes have gone up. He's not guaranteed to play, but he's got the best chance of playing out of all the players at that price point. Last but not least is Jackson. He's only 7 mil, and he's going to make the most out of the Chelsea fixtures that I've been banging on about. He'll probably get a decent amount of minutes at the start of the season whilst Nkunku's injured. If he carries on playing well, he'll probably keep that spot. If not, I'll probably just shift him onto Nkunku anyway. I was strongly considering Nkunku before he got injured. Jesus was on my watch list as well. He also got injured. I did consider Watkins as well, but he does cost $1 million more, and that's harder to find when you've got Salah in your team. If there are any changes to this team after the press conferences, make sure you're following me on Twitter because they will be announced on there. If you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of these videos, and best of luck with this season.